We are going to be visiting with Mr. Matt Brown in just a moment, but before we do, I'd like to thank our Dean, Dean Vile, and Ms. Susan Lyons for being here today. Thank you. I am going to introduce you to a friend of mine, Matt Brown. He is in the English department. He's a writer, an activist. I have to keep moving this further away. Editor and educator. His work has been published in literary presses and journals in the United States, and he has been featured in He has been a featured lecturer and performer in the community art forums and in academic conferences throughout the North America and Europe. He is founder of the Writers Corp, a community literacy program for writing in military families. Excuse me, for veterans and military families. I'm having a hard time speaking this afternoon. That's his formal bio. But what I want to tell you about is I've worked with him for, I guess, how long now, Matt? It's been 7 or 8 years? Right in front of me. 7 years. And when we had our lecturer here 2 weeks ago, Dr. Ken McLeish, one of your classmates stopped in afterwards and asked him how she could be involved. You know, she was not a veteran, and how do you become involved in veterans issues, in veterans work, if you yourself were not in the military? And Dr. McLeish answered and said, you know, we say that all the time. I can't possibly understand your story. This is not my story. I can't do this. And we're doing it to be deferential to the military. But it also, and I don't want to put words in Dr. McLeish's mouth, but I understood him to say that we were being somewhat academically lazy by not taking on that challenge. You know, sometimes we don't want to learn our biology or algebra, but we're expected to do it regardless of what our background has been, correct? And so he was saying that we need to take on that challenge as well. That was echoed just the very next week by our speaker, I guess maybe the fourth one, Donald Whitfield, when he said the same thing, was that we need to take on and learn about what these veterans have gone through, and that you don't have to be in the military yourself to do it. And so that's what I'm so excited for Matt to be speaking today, because he also is not a veteran, and he kind of answers that same question that was posed in this class. How do you get involved? How do you do it? And he's someone who's busy. He's a husband, a father. He is an academic. He is a commuter. He's renovating his house, and he's writing his dissertation, but he still took this on. And he's going to show us, he's going to answer that question about how do I do it if I'm not in the military myself. So that's his formal biography, which I kind of stumbled through, but hopefully you got an idea of who he is. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt. Professor Brown.
Well, I thank you for the very warm words of welcome, although I hate to begin with a contradiction. I'm not so sure that I'm going to show you anything. The whole point is of what we're doing today is for some of the people who work with the group that I founded here on campus and have expanded and that I work with, what they're capable of doing and what they've have done with some of the kind of very simplistic messages and very simplistic practices that we undertake. But it is true, I'm not a veteran. I graduated high school in the spring of 2001 and graduated in a very impoverished and rural community where people were essentially pledging themselves upon graduation to a life of struggle, poverty, working for minimum wage at best at the largest generic dry goods factory in North America, or having some hope of getting on at the local prison or institution for the mentally and criminally insane. Kind of hurdle to jump through before you can get that is to go through the military. So just about everybody who I was friends with went into the military, and everybody's life plans were greatly, greatly altered by the events that happened within a month or so after I sat in a military recruitment office in August of 2001, where I heard that I had gotten a pretty major scholarship and was therefore kind of released from having to commit myself to military service. And so I carried that with me. I had just about everybody I cared about so deeply, all my very, very good friends, went to war almost universally several times through the invasion of Kabul and Baghdad and all the areas, of course, surrounding those capitals. And I carried that with me. I traveled around, kind of was a vagrant and lived around different parts of the world for a while, always with the hope that I could do something to give back. And I'm going to guess that sitting in this room are a number of people who foster that hope, that at some point you can find an opportunity to give back, to fill in those gaps that are left by the fact that some of us, just by sheer luck or birthright or whatever you want to call it, have opportunities to not have to undergo experiences that would fundamentally alter us and maybe put hurdles that are a little bit too high to jump. Out of everybody who I knew growing up who went into the military, predominantly for a reason that was predicated upon the desire to go to college, none of them graduated. Virtually all of them went after, if they survived their deployments, but none of them graduated. And so I always had this hope that I could do something that could help out, something that could give back. And what did I have? I'm a writer. Predominantly, I'm a poet. And that's my passion. That's who I am. So when I came to MTSU from Western Washington University 7 years ago to a school that had a high density of veterans in attendance versus a school that didn't have that, I knew that this was a program I wanted to get off the ground. So I started up right away, and it's grown since. We're now in several states and also have people who are working with us in a couple of countries, and we're looking at expanding the number of states and countries that we're working with. I've actually been in several meetings today looking to do that. Just recently, thanks in many parts to our new digital and social media manager, Molly Blankenship, who's sitting over here, we have a digital presence. So this is our new website that you can come to. The URL is writercorps.org. And you can learn more about what we do. You have descriptions. You have various pages. This is still a work in progress. You can find out a little bit about events that we have. Here we are, obviously, today. I love this picture of Spencer. Kind of scares me a little. You can find copies of our journal. These things still aren't completely formatted correctly. This is a work in progress. If you go to these, you're going to see the formatting that I had to design in order to lay these things out for publication so that the page numbers would outline correctly, right? So it's the last page and first page, and it moves around as you go through, right? 22 and 3 and so on and so forth. So the other thing I want to talk to you briefly about are some of the opportunities that this group has been involved with or has been offered or that we've created for ourselves in the past year or so, probably most fundamental of which is a partnership that we did with a group of Iraqi refugees who are fleeing from the conflict that is emerging out of Syria right now with ISIS. We did this partnership through the International Institute of St. Louis, and two of our Marine veterans, Sean Martin and Daniel Ward, both of whom you'll hear from later, but Daniel's not here with us today, went with me to St. Louis, and we met with a group of refugees in order to facilitate a writing workshop. We also did the same thing here on campus with members of this group, and we put these things together, and they were featured in the U.S. Congress and the State Department. We've had over 33,000 people who have visited the site where this is hosted, which is this, which you can come to and read a little bit more about the project. And you can read samples of the writing. You can read the prompt that I wrote, that I had translated. The prompt that I wrote, translated into Arabic, Iraqi Arabic to be specific, there was a big problem whenever I created this prompt because it dealt with differing concepts of what it means to try to find a sense of belonging or home after experiencing the hardships of warfare. But in the Arabic language, there is no word that translates directly into home. If you've taken French, you know this too, or several other European languages. So trying to facilitate that was very difficult. But this was a very interesting project. You can come here and you can find out more about what we've done. But it's been a big boon for me, having come from that background, that I'm going to imagine many people in this room experience daily or will grow to experience as you get deeper into adulthood, that you've been allotted opportunities that are not as normal as they may seem or may have seemed. And you look for ways to pay it back or to pay it forward. And what you find, if you're lucky enough to foster the kinds of connections that allow you to do some of this work, is that that evaporates. That you're not really paying anything forward. You're not really paying anything back. But you're given this tremendous opportunity to witness the truest element of the human experience and the strength that people can have to go through things that we can barely imagine and come back and say, you know what, that's not enough. I want to help people understand. I want to help people to connect, because that's what saved me. And that's what's helped me walk down the street. And I'll quit taking up your time. So I want to invite up here Professor Kevin Brown. And he's going to introduce a series of readers who are going to read either their own pieces that have been published and copies of our journal. I'll pass one copy of the 3 journals we have in distribution right now around, so you can kind of flip through it. If you're interested in getting a copy, they're free, but supplies are very limited at this point. So please make sure I get these back, and also please make sure that you talk to me if you're interested in getting some, and I can make that happen when we're done here today. So you'll either hear people who read their own pieces, or you're going to hear people who read pieces in substitution for those who either could not attend or are at great distance. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for having us. I'm Kevin Brown. I'm not a veteran either. Big family of veterans. My grandfather was a career veteran, a career Army, and I just realized my mother was an Army brat. I never realized that. But it was never, not like they were like traveling around, because he was like always off in Europe or Vietnam or Korea. So like they were always back here, so they weren't like getting ripped up all the time. But let's just say I remember having Thanksgiving dinner on base at Fort Bliss in West Texas. So now when we first started doing readings, I used to get like little bios from everybody, and I would introduce them, and then it became pretty obvious like it's better to just let them say what they would like to say about themselves, as little or as much as they would like to. So with that said, I'm going to bring up our first reader, who is Spencer Johnston.
Good afternoon. I'm Spencer Johnston. I'm a member of the 267th Military Police Company with the Tennessee Army National Guard. I've been in the Tennessee Army National Guard for 8.5 years now. Contract's up in June. Not sure if I'm going to re-sign or not. That's still an ongoing debate within myself. The piece I'm going to read you today is an older piece. It's actually the first piece I ever wrote with this group. To me, it's one of the greatest pieces I've ever written as far as an insight to what you see when soldiers come home from Iraq or from war, and the adaptability of how you go from one extreme to the other, and the harsh time that soldiers have with overcoming the different stereotypes of what people expect of them and what they expect of themselves. A lot of times they think it'll be easy, and a lot of times it's just not. So this is called Beats with No C. Stepping out the plain back, our eyes first met the wasteland before us. Only one thing was apparent: brown. Gone were the sights of fresh-smelling elms and glass skyscrapers. Gone was the TV and being unconscious to the world. What awaited us was a single hue that symbolized everything we were supposedly fighting for. The ground was not dirt, but compacted sand that surrounded and clouded all, the air included. The fine grits that so annoyingly filled everything we owned, weapons, gear, hopes, and our spirits, soon knocked out longing for any other colors. It disguised the leaves that were born green, and it diluted the water that fell from the sky. It was the color of the uniform after several washes, the color of our sheets after one night's sleep, the color we'd come to believe in. The buildings were so buffeted by minute shards of death that they also soon assimilated, the same effect that so discolored our skin after a long day outside. It covered the flags that had to be replaced every week. The taste of it never left our teeth and tongues. It was the filth of the bottom of the shower, the rags we used to wash it all off. So accustomed did we become to the only existing pigment that when we got back, seeing prisms of paint, it clouded our monotone existence. We realized that this new world we came to is not home anymore, and we do not belong. Other colors occupy our perception now, but forever, we realize, there is only brown. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Spencer. Our next reader is Sean Matthews. Sean Martin.
Well, clearly I'm not Sean Matthews. Matt Brown has sort of taken up a lot of the time for my bio because I actually come from his hometown. So insert everything he told you about him going through 2001, I went through 2005. So I sort of got the other side of the life. Didn't have any options, didn't really have any opportunities to go forward, so I let my poverty sort of decide where I went, and I went into the Marines. And, I've been out 6 years now. Only did a short time, 4.5 years from 2005 to 2009. Got out, didn't really know what to do with myself. Somehow made it down to Nashville, and then I found him. So, it happens. But I guess sort of going through what everybody's sort of said, you've heard words about how people sort of interpret everything around you and how people have sort of taken on this whole different line between the sand between somebody such as yourselves and a military service member. And for me, it sort of comes down to the language that everybody uses, the symbolic thought process behind the words that you say to somebody, sort of like hero, broken, veteran, So this piece that I'm going to read you today, A Word, sort of touches on a lot of those aspects, but it's very cryptic, so I apologize. A word. I refrain with steely cold vigilance when laying a word. For a word is a model of the unpretentious existence that binds space with time, folding deep within a planar parable. A word hinges all that cannot be into the realm of inevitability with Merktelian ink for the furthering of absolution. Only on the basis of a word is a word the root of truth, and only truth it imposes with its weight. The weight eternal through vice of memory gospel archetypes to float safe pilgrims of coercion into the heathen womb of life. A word to cast off the old and the rebirth of new with no shackle to restrain the thought, only the action. As a word placed idle, unaware of trials and consequence, creation creates in its own construction. A word to heal is a symbol of conveyance and control with only purpose to its certainty of id. Justify the prose, just to lay a word. Aye. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sean Martin. Let me just say, I'm never going to hear the end of that. So the next piece I'm going to read by Daniel Ward. Daniel's been coming in for a couple of years now, working on his longer memoirs. I just realized this actually follows a kind of a long tradition of literature, and I've read a lot of Civil War accounts, and a lot of times they talk a lot about the horses, the bodies of the horses, as much as like the horror of the battle, you know. So anyway, this one's called "To Make a Desert and Call It Peace" by Daniel Ward. In a village just west of Cemetery, 2nd Squad discovers the devastating results of an American counter-battery fire. Walking into the shattered remains of an animal pen, I survey our handiwork. The scene before me is one of absolute butchery, the air laden with the bitter redolence of rotting flesh. Twisted and torn around several blackened pits, the body of sheep and goats lay in every conceivable state of disfigurement, bloating in the sun. All have died with maximum violence. Throats have been torn out, stomachs burst, limbs shorn. The dirt beneath me is stained with a deep purplish-brown mixture of dried blood, viscera, and shit. Swarms of flies feast upon the dead. Encircled by the bodies of its companions, the lone donkey stands unsteadily with the gore and ruin of the destroyed enclosure. It sways upon its feet, and scarlet rivulets of life fluid pulse from a jagged, gaping wound in its right hindquarters. As I approach the animal, it doesn't bray, snort, or stamp its hooves. It totters about in a shock-induced delirium, its big brown eyes confused and questioning. Why did this happen? Guilt stabs at my conscience. I wanted this. This is my fault. I wanted to go to war, and I wanted to blow shit up. Just not like this. This isn't fun. The animal's owner silently strides up beside me. He sighs in resignation. In the span of seconds, a salvo of American shells have destroyed his animals and imperiled his livelihood. And I wanted it to happen. And now all he has left is a single wounded donkey. Summoning the squad's corpsman, I asked if anything can be done for the surviving animal. The question is absurd and perhaps futile, but I present it nonetheless. Our doc skeptically assesses the injured beast and tells me that the effort might not even be worth it. I continue to push the issue, undeterred. Man, I'm not getting kicked by that thing, the sailor says with finality as he raises his hands and backs away from the sad little burro. Damn it, Doc, I growl. It's not going to kick me. It's lost too much blood. I can fix this. Opening my first aid kit, I remove a pressure dressing and unroll the bandage. A few local children watch in silent interest from a distance. I gently begin wrapping the binding under and over the donkey's wounded leg. The pulpy wound turns the bleach white fabric a bright shade of red. I double and triple the layers of gauze and cinch my binding down tight around the animal's leg. She doesn't even flinch. As I finish my work, I stand up and look at Doc for approval. See? His brow is furrowed in a cynical frown. Yeah, sure, all better. Not far from where I stand, my team leader's radio receives an order from Sergeant Whiteman. He nods and gestures for everyone to get ready to move out. With nary a word to the beleaguered farmer, the squad continues on its patrol. As we march further into the restive, riverine landscape of Abdul Jamali, vortexes of sand swirl like dervishes around the scattered dead, and the wind carries with it the rancid aroma of their destruction. As the donkey's life grows fleeting, the image of its sad and innocent eyes entrenches itself within my mind. Death coils its noose around the burro's neck like a python, as a python constricts its prey, and I can't bring myself to turn around and acknowledge another monument to all of my sins. I can kill, I can destroy, and I can fight, but for the life of me, I can't figure out how to bury the dead. All right, that's Daniel's story. Now, our next reader is a faculty here at MTSU, also, and Dr. Patrick Ritchie.
And if things go well, by the end of next week, there will also be a Dr. Matt Brown. So hopefully that works in his favor. We'll see. But that's me now, or me now as a professor and debate coach at MTSU. But once upon a time, I was your age, and not a whole lot different than Sean's story. I was basically the top end of lower class, the bottom end of middle class. And so I had one option, go in the military. It was the only way to go to school. And so I did, but I went in a lot earlier than most these folks, and so I was living the dream until I was a sophomore in college, and we had that 9/11 thing happen. And so I was like, uh-oh, got stood up, activated, did some stuff, stood back down and thought, okay, I can get through my tour and get out of the military and continue on with college. And it was working pretty well till I was a senior, and then I got called up for Iraq. And so my senior year of college as an undergraduate, I married my high school sweetheart, or not high school, college sweetheart, because I came from a military family. I figured if I was going to get killed, it's a lot better that she gets a lot of money out of the deal than nothing. And so really kind of dark stuff you think about, but when you get sent to war, you just kind of deal with it. And so I went to Iraq. I was part of the invasion, part of what was called the honeymoon, where it was actually peaceful, and then part of the insurgency. Over a year and a half span, we did all three of those kind of different phases of the war over there. And I went over there as a civil affairs sergeant. So I was a sergeant, I had some soldiers, and our main mission was to work with the civilian population in Iraq. Anybody remember that big scene where George Bush is sitting on the aircraft carrier and like, you know, we won? All right, at that point, according to military doctrine, the war was over, and everything since that point, it became a civil affairs mission to rebuild the country of Iraq. Well, a decade later, you know it didn't go that smoothly. And so part of what I did was work with the civilians out in the local villages and communities and try to rebuild Iraq. And it wasn't just rebuilding Iraq from a 90-day war, but a decade of embargoes, another decade war with Iran, and so on and so forth. So Iraq was in really bad shape. Those of you who don't really know a whole lot about it, you probably should read up on the complexities of it, and then you'll understand why it was a decade-long war for the United States alone. And it continues to be a war to this day, even though we're quote-unquote not there anymore. And so this is just one little kind of anecdotal story about when I was over there, but it's one that still kind of resonates with me to this day. And I wrote this probably about 2 years ago, and it's still there today. All right, the little girl of Al-Sahara. Missions came and went. Some were action-packed with small arms fire and IEDs, but most were mundane and routine with only sweat and fatigue. Sometimes we would chat with a government minister, a sheik, or a local shop owner to discuss problems or projects. Others to visit schools. On a hot August day, we briefly stopped in the little village of Al-Sahara, south of Camp Spiker. I couldn't tell you why we stopped. It's of little importance anymore. Only a detail stands out of this stop from the thousands of others over the tour I spent in Iraq. Yet this detail finds its way into my dreams today. It wasn't a violent event, yet it was tragic. I didn't know it, but it has followed me. Youth has the ability to tune out pain and suffering. She was young, maybe 6 or 8 at most. She wore what must have been a beautiful little dress that was now worn and tattered. The years had been unkind to the dress and the people here. The men were worn with wrinkles and scars, and the women aged beyond their years. Yet this little girl was different. Past the weather dress and a body covered in filthy dirt that covered everything in Iraq, was a normal little girl with a beautiful wide smile and dark flowing hair. It caught me off guard as I waited outside, keeping an eye on our trucks and equipment, making sure no one stole anything or planted a grenade in them. She waved and smiled with her tiny soot-stained hand. She didn't beg or pilfer like most of the children. She stood there taking me in, wondering what kind of alien I must be with this funny clothing, light skin, all the odd equipment strapped to me, the blue Garmin, the bayonet, the first aid pack, radios, and the bulky ammo. The scene seemed funny, though, since I was as dirty as she. I offered her a piece of candy from an MRE, and she slowly, cautiously accepted it. She smiled even more after she tasted the sugar. I gave her a quarter, something shiny and pretty for a little girl who looked like she had very little. She looked at it over and over with her big dark eyes, looking up at me every so often. The soldiers emerged from what was probably her parents' or relatives' mud house. We loaded up, checked our weapons, ammo, and water, and continued on our way. I remember looking in the rearview mirror and seeing her wave frantically as we drove off, leaving a cloud of dust covering the whole area. I don't know her name and sadly never will. I saw her only one time. We never went back to the small village, yet her memory haunts me often. I can't decide if I'm sad or happy. I wonder if she remembers me after all these years. Does she still smile at U.S. soldiers or at all? Has she grown fast beyond her years like so many women in Iraq? Time and strife destroy youth like a hungry jackal. Is she even still alive? In the confusion of war, little girls get lost so easily. But she is not lost in my mind. I still see the little girl with a dirty, torn, tattered dress, with dirt caked on her body. Under all this, she is just still a little girl with a bright smile and dark hair, like my own Abigail. Thank you.
All right, our last piece is by Michelle Shelley, and it's going to be read by our web designer, Molly Blankenship.
Hi. So I don't know much about Shelley's veteran experience. I'm sure some of them do if you care to ask. She's a Marine, many of them are, and I think that she's probably not here because she's engaged in farm work, so she is working hard somewhere, undoubtedly. This piece is entitled Little Bird, the biography of Gone Girl. Little bird, saved, rescued, out of breath, not out of life, regained strength and renewed ardor from the warmth and kindness of a stranger. Little bird, revived, could have stayed in that sheltered chest, but new life was too big for a crumbling shoebox. Little bird, reborn, flew high and wild out into the world, weak but grew strong, shielded but courageous. Flight of fancy knew no limits. I watched in awe as little bird broke the bounds beyond the glass, life outside the box. Awake, she lifted the glass, took a sip, and put it down, amused at the sweat rolling down the frosty, angular structure, slender and classy, something she always wished she'd be, but always seemed more like a dump truck. She was sleepy. She let herself fall into the black abyss, where she might again crash through the glass to another time. She fell asleep. I hit the wall hard, face first, thinking it was sheetrock, but it was glass. Not the kind that splintered in shards, the kind that shattered. Strangely, I was uncut. I was in another world. I felt underwater. I could float or I could drown. But I knew I had to keep moving. Even with the lead weights opposing my appendages, pulling me down. It was yet another place I had no familiarity. No one knew me. I didn't know myself. What was I doing here? I can't turn back. I can't quit. Where exactly am I heading? Breathing was hard, excruciating, exhausting. And then panic set in. Why was I here? What am I doing? What is this for? How did I get here? In this moment, right now. Outside, looking in. She stopped herself before she lunged for the hug, overwhelmed with emotion seeing him. Do not enter. She didn't notice the sign until her body banged into it. The joy, ecstasy, thought. It was meant to be. It was always meant to be. This is how and why I got here. We ended up together. It all makes sense now. Was impeded. Blocked. Completely impassable. He was smaller than she remembered. Shrunken, deep-set eyes, dirty, sad, solemn, quiet. Not that funny, full-of-life persona that she remembered. They shook hands. She focused on his hand, wanting to bat it away and just embrace him, taking all of the pain from his eyes and the sadness from his soul, but a handshake would be all they shared. Formalities of how things were. "Hey, what are you doing here?" each exclaimed. Defenses, protests, and excuses. Then the realization that neither was ever supposed to see each other again. When they last parted ways, both had plans of separating and moving on from their current life. He was going to be a coach, no more service. She was to start her own business, big plans. But somehow they met again in the desert, worlds away and yet near again, to make things right, but wondering why they were there, and seeing each other again, and sincerely protesting why they were still in uniform and not chasing their freedom and dreams. Neither had moved on, at least far enough to get away, and both would never meet again, nor wear the uniform, never fully taking in just why their paths crossed that day, perhaps a reminder of a moment, something that passed in time but held a value or possibility somewhere in the universe. She died, yet again, not to end life, but to see the art of the possible. She was gifted at dying. She was good at it. It wasn't always an ending, but a means to fill in the blanks of all her open-ended stories. Her dying was how she killed off dead tissue, transforming what was left into a new, renewed force. I knew if I could just make it to the bathroom, I wouldn't have to fight back the tears. It was my safe zone. As I slid down the wall, curling up into the cool tile floor, tears now streaming down my cheeks, bam! The door slams open. Startled, I quickly wiped the tears, ready to yell at the rude individual breaking into my solitude. "What wrong?" broken English from the Asian man, apparently yelling at me in the ladies' room. I thought I was being scolded, but here I was in the bathroom. This is my safe place. I'm not a coward. I'm not weak here. I'm isolated. But he was not abiding by the rules. I just stammered. I had no words forming in my mouth, just the pain shrieking down my arm and spine, now constricting and corrupting the muscles into contorted shapes. Without words, just tears, I sort of pointed, motioned at the injury wreaking havoc through my spine and arm. The man with his 2 henchmen grabbed my arm, gave a yank, and started some kind of medieval ritual on my body. They somehow took the pain away in that mystical Far East manner, or it was merely the sheer embarrassment that numbed my nerves. But somehow it was warming. I let out a smile and mouthed, "Thank you." The slight Korean man with the big presence barked, "You crying girl." The wonderful moment dissolved abruptly into awkwardness. I could feel my face wince at how unflattering the title was. He noticed. "No, no, 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 no. You tears. They real. No embarrass. Crying girl real. Real tears. What word? Authentic? You real. You authentic." I didn't know how to take that. I was being defended. For crying? For showing the most blatant weakness? For ultimately breaking down? I'm pretty sure that's not the sign of a warrior, of a black belt, of a person training for greatness. But it didn't bother him. This legend in his art, the man that was being paid to host and train so many in the art of self-defense, the way of using martial arts to harmonize the mind and body to reach a higher, more enlightened state of existence, somehow taken or at least entertained by this seemingly insignificant circumstance. yet meant so much. My only guess is my lesson that day was trying to find harmony between my own body and expectation with my body. The wounds that keep weeping. She was always self-conscious about the wound, kept it bandaged, covered, safe, but too often the ooze would seep through, exposing her vulnerability. Embarrassed and shaken, she would cower away to tend to it. Over and over, she thought it would heal, scab over, disappear. It just would not scab. Gone girl. When I drink, she disappears. As I wake, she disappears. When I eat, it's not because of hunger, it's because of the joy of consuming, taking in what someone has crafted. A trip around the world in one taste. Each bite a memory of a person, experience, sight, or smell of a time that I can never go back to, even if I paid every dollar in the world, like Alice in Wonderland. Or the exhilaration of a shared kiss from a stranger during a long night of drinking and writing the world. I know when I wake, it will all fold back into origami, to be unraveled another time. This time it was soothing bourbon that ran down her neck, stopping to rub her shoulders, warming her innards. Something about setting free the restrictions she put on herself every minute of every day. Should have, would have, why didn't you? You didn't. Not good enough, you're never good enough. When she drank, she enjoyed the company of her mind. The one that blasts her eternally is quieted by the fan club that eagerly awaits the chance to cheer her on. She drifted. I saw her today. She was off in the corner, lost in thought. Seemed to battle with telling me the story of her, and withdrawing, vanishing. I am always cautious with her. For her brazen and bold, sometimes prickly exterior, she is delicate, fragile, and young. It's as if she's struck where tragedy abducted her. I tried to come to her, but she didn't want to talk today. She just wanted me to know that she was there, and at some point would share her story with me. Thank you.
So that's all the readers for today. I think everyone's going to come up and you can ask questions, Q&A. By the way, Daniel Ward, he was a Marine infantry if you didn't figure that out. Operation Iraqi Freedom, 2007 and 2008. Anyway, so I'll bring Matt back up here.
I want to ask everybody to come up, so if we have questions and answers, just remember that if someone asks you a question directly or if you're going to respond, to come over by the microphone. But let's give all the readers another.
So any questions about the process or about the story? Matt, can you tell us a little bit about how y'all are organized as a group here on campus? What your meetings are like?
So we use the typical creative writing workshop model for our meetings, meaning that people come in and they have a piece written, and we make copies of of each piece. And so everybody has a hard copy in front of them, and that person reads it out loud. And then we all make comments on the page and then have a discussion. So our concept is everybody, for the most part, who's a vet, if you know a lot of vets, you know this, they tell stories, right? You guys live in Tennessee, most of you, at least you do now. You're from here. Then you know that, like you go to a family reunion, you've got these family members or whomever that, like, when you were a kid, you tried to escape, and now as you get older, maybe you spend a little more time sitting close to, who are going to tell you these stories. So our concept is, you're going to tell them, I'm not a vet, Kevin's not a vet, but we're both pretty seriously publishing writers, and so we know how to tell stories well. And so we're, and most of the people who are in the group now for a little while, including the people who either read or whose pieces were read today, are pretty savvy on the process. And so we know how to make those stories a little bit stronger. So our concept is there's what is true, but what we're working to do is to try to find the truth that lies beyond the true. So maybe it didn't happen in this order. Maybe this isn't the exact place or day or whatever, but how do you try to bend that essential emotional, spiritual, conscious element to something that other people can understand? So that's what we do.
Matt, I have a question. I attended a funeral this weekend of a 93-year-old man who was a decorated World War II veteran. He received a Purple Heart, among other medals. And his granddaughter said to me, Granddaddy had just started talking about the war. He said, and I apologize, he said that people who have really seen combat don't talk about it because they can't talk about it. And he's not the first World War II veteran I've known who's experienced that. And I just wondered, for all of you, in that context, what does that mean to you? What is it about your experience that calls you to speak these words as opposed to internalizing and holding them?
Well, I'm going to turn this over to them so that they can answer what it is that makes them feel comfortable sharing this stuff, not only with the group but also public, because we don't call ourselves a creative writing workshop group. Maybe that's what we call ourselves in the beginning, but the official title we use now is Community Literacy Program, especially because part of our designed advocacy is trying to share with people who wouldn't have an opportunity to hear these things, which are greatly affecting. If you didn't find it so, then goodbye. But they're greatly affecting. So to share these messages with the public at large, as we've spread across the country and even now in different kind of small pockets internationally with what we're doing as a program, one of the things that has sprung up is we have had people who've come and said, I want to share this message. Basically my days are running out and I want to find a way to share this message with my children. And sometimes there have been times where I've gotten that message, and by the time I've responded pretty quickly, it's too late. So that's part of that generation, right? But I'll turn it over to them. As to a more directed question, what is it that, because the vast majority of people are so kind of reticent to share these experiences, what is it that allows you or compels you to do so?
I've got a couple things to say on this. I've been to 3 soldiers' funerals since I've been in service. 2 are suicide funerals, and I think that we're entering a culture now that is unlike World War II. War is always going to be war, but I think that World War II and Vietnam vets had a lot of trouble because they didn't know how, and they weren't respected in the way that they should have been. So it was harder for them to open up because it was seen as a sign of weakness, and we still go through that in the military. And that's what's so great about this group, is having the ability to come in and pound out your story with other veterans and say, look, I'm not trying to seem sappy here, but I'm trying to get this point across. And the main reason that I'm in this group, and I don't want to speak for them, but is so we can make stories that would help you guys understand what some of us went through. And not necessarily that we're looking for your pity, because we're not. But when you've been to the funerals that I have, it tends to leave a different kind of mark when you approach how you're going to open up about things. And I know there's some veterans in here right now that aren't on stage that, I've dealt with the same thing. I mean, I think in the Tennessee Army National Guard last year, we had over 60 suicides. And that's just in Tennessee and just in the Army National Guard. So when we're talking about opening up, and for an artistic personality, it's not as much that we can't talk about it. For me, it's more that I can't not talk about it because I need to be able to relate that. But some people have trouble. Some people, just because talking to other people, who are they going to talk to, you know? They don't want to lay that burden on their families. The people that they talk to is other veterans. It's a tough deal. It's definitely not a happy one. But, Sean, you got anything?
I would say something completely in the opposite direction. Actually, I tend to just write for jealous, selfish purposes because I haven't been to too many military funerals, but being in communications in the Marines, you get phone calls that start with all zeros, and you get like 2 numbers at the end of it, and probably for about, say, a good 2 years. Yeah, roughly about 2 years. Probably got about 30 of those phone calls saying that one of my friends wasn't coming back. And there's nothing that, you can go out of your way, talk to their family, because at that time, we have a call sign called River City that pretty much, they shut down all communication within the theater, so you don't get anything out. But that phone call gets out some way because we know how to treat the system a little bit. That's what comm does. But you can't go out of your way to find those families. You can't go back and talk about it. And, I don't know if anybody knows, I didn't even say what I did. I was on small teams that worked in police departments, just living with Iraqi police departments for months at a time. Never really saw a base. I heard it was nice. Don't really see too much of it. So the things that you do see and the people that you walk away from and out of those situations that don't come back, for me, I have too much, respect for the time while we were all together to never really, go out of my way to try to tell it like it was, because I know I'd bias it, and I don't think I could ever really do anything that dishonorable. Like, I don't even talk to my shrinks like that. That's pretty much one of the reasons that lead into that situation of suicide is, you have such a small pool of people that will get you. And from that pool, it just gets smaller and smaller to a point where, like I said, I write selfishly. I even said it was going to be abstract. So you can figure out what it means, if there is meaning in it. For me, there is. Whether you see it or not, it's a road that you're going to have to go down your own self to figure out what I'm talking about. But that's as near as I could ever get to even trying to, give the respect that I could for the time that I was there, let alone even try to discuss it. So, for me, I'm one of those closed-mouthed individuals. I talk a big game, like I am a part of a lot, and I'm very truthful about it, but I don't like talking about it. I really don't. And it's just going to be one of those things that I got to walk through. So, it's a completely different standpoint, but, that's the whole thing about, where we come from out of the military is we all come out different. There's not a carbon copy, hero, broken. It's a multitude of different variants in between. So, like I said, I'm very abstract. Sorry.
Matt, I think that's about all the time that we have. Thank you guys for your answer. Before you get too far, though, I want to, Sean, you are an anthropology and
Sociology,
philosophy major. And Spencer, what are you? What is your major?
I don't even go here. I did. I used to go here. I was a philosophy major.
Philosophy, okay. So you don't have to be a writing major, so you don't have to be an English major to participate. And it's kind of the point that I wanted to make.
We're also available, so we're veterans, but also military families. So if you're a spouse, former spouse, or dependent, we have those people too.
I think that your writings were amazing, and they were all over. And I think that you demonstrated that what someone could do even if they were not a veteran themselves. So thank you for answering the question that's been kind of popping up the last few weeks. Give them a hand.